Do you believe that a ship 135 meters long, weighing over 14,000 tons, could be completed in just 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes? Sounds like science fiction, but that crazy feat really happened. Right on American soil, during the most brutal years of World War II. Hit subscribe and follow the channel to explore how America achieved the impossible and why a steel ship could change the course of world history. In 1944, at the Richmond shipyard in California, amid thousands of blazing welding sparks and the non-stop clang of steel hammers, American workers achieved the impossible. The SS Benjamin Warner, a Victory-class ship, was launched just 5 days and 11 hours after its keel was laid. A massive block of steel nearly the length of 4 football fields, taller than a 10-story building, and weighing tens of thousands of tons, brought to life not in months, but in less than a week. Behind that seemingly absurd number was an entire era when America turned itself into the largest shipbuilding factory on the planet, when human willpower achieved what machines alone couldn't. A world map forms in the imagination. In the middle of the Pacific, fireballs explode from Pearl Harbor. On December 7, 1941, America awoke to fire and smoke. Japan's attack dragged the nation into the greatest war in human history. Within weeks, Americans realized they didn't just need guns, they needed ships, lots of them, faster than ever before. In the Atlantic, German submarines, the infamous U-boats, lurked like wolf packs. They ambushed convoys and sank thousands of cargo ships. In 1942 alone, over 1,000 Allied ships were sunk. Every lost ship meant thousands of tons of food, ammunition, fuel, and the lives of sailors. Without rapidly rebuilding the fleet, the war could be lost before the front lines were even reached. But building ships back then was a nightmare. A traditional cargo ship took 8 to 10 months to complete. Meanwhile, dozens of ships were being sunk every week. The whole nation looked to the shipyards and understood speed was survival. At that moment, the U.S. Maritime Commission handed the responsibility to an unlikely name, Henry John Kaiser. He wasn't a naval engineer. He was a construction contractor, the man behind extraordinary projects, the Hoover Dam, the Grand Coulee Dam, symbols of American might during the Great Depression. When war broke out, Kaiser said something history would never forget. If we can build a dam in the desert, we can build a ship in wartime. He proposed an entirely new method, mass production for ships, like building cars. No more hand riveting, use electric welding instead. No more assembling tiny parts, pre-make large modules and piece them together. And most importantly, instead of relying on slow artisans, Kaiser built ship factories that ran 3 shifts around the clock. The nation was skeptical. Some veteran engineers scoffed, "You can't build ships like you build cars." But Kaiser replied, "We're at war, and time is our weapon." Between 1942 and 1943, 4 peaceful corners of America turned into forests of cranes: Richmond in California, Portland in Oregon, Baltimore in Maryland, and South Portland in Maine. From dawn to midnight, welding flames lit the sky like artificial sunrise. Hundreds of thousands of workers, including tens of thousands of women, the riveters, joined steel beams, cut plates, welded seams, and pushed hulls to sea. Kaiser turned heavy industry into a weapon of freedom. In November 1942, the world was stunned when the SS Robert E. Peary was completed in just 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. An unthinkable record, which the press called the miracle of steel. From that point on, a new ship launched nearly every day. In 4 years, America built 2,710 Liberty ships, each carrying over 9,000 tons of cargo, fuel, food, weapons, all produced in record time. Every 2 days, another ship left the dock. A steel army, tireless, unstoppable, always advancing. That was the era when Americans believed nothing was impossible. That with their hands, their minds, and the fire of electric welders, they could forge the fate of the world. But then, amidst the cheers, another sound echoed. A cold, dry sound like steel snapping, a sound that warned miracles could become disasters. January morning, 1943, Portland Harbor, Oregon. The water was still as glass. The SS Schenectady, a brand new ship launched less than 2 months prior, suddenly broke in half while docked. No waves, no wind, just a sharp, brittle crack, and the ship sank. No bullets, no bombs, just steel, betraying man. In 1943, America began to face a hidden enemy lurking within its own steel. Then, just as America was drunk on the high of speed and output, an eerie explosion echoed through the calm morning in Portland, Oregon. On January 16, 1943, the SS Schenectady, a T2SEA-1 oil tanker, had just completed its first test run and was quietly moored at the Swan Island dock. No wind, no waves, no warning tremors. In an instant, a dry, cracking sound ripped through the air, like someone snapping a massive bone. The hull began to bend. The midship deck rose out of the water, while both ends dipped down. A crack tore across the ship, from port to starboard, from the deck all the way to the keel. The ship, over 16,000 tons and only a few weeks old, broke in half before the stunned eyes of workers who hadn't even had time to react. Locals around the port said the blast was heard more than a mile away. Some suspected sabotage. The FBI was immediately deployed, fearing German or Japanese spies, but there were no traces of explosives, no signs of intruders, only steel, and its deadly silence. Initially, the U.S. Coast Guard Investigation Board concluded that poor welding might be the cause. But even they had to admit, this went beyond what the technology of the time could explain. No one understood how steel, the very symbol of strength, could shatter in total stillness. Schenectady wasn't a Liberty ship. It was a T2 tanker, bigger, more complex. But the incident sparked a wave of disasters across the oceans. Liberty cargo ships, America's pride, began showing deck cracks, weld line fractures, eerie shrieks echoing in the night. According to technical records of the time, over 1,400 serious fracture reports were submitted to the Maritime Commission. At least 19 Liberty ships broke completely in two, including the SS John P. Gaines, which exploded in the freezing Alaskan seas in November 1943, killing 10 crew members. Some ships were never found. They vanished at sea, leaving only twisted shards of steel behind. Captains began whispering, "These ships can break themselves." American sailors gave Liberty ships a chilling nickname, steel coffins. They no longer feared U-boat torpedoes. They feared their own ships. The nightmare spread across the docks. Strange cracks forced shipyards to halt. The press dubbed it the steel crack epidemic. America was shaken. How could this happen when every ship was built from the same design, the same steel, the same welding methods, by the same hands that had once achieved miracles? To unravel the unexplainable, scientists were called in. And among the white lab coats, one name stood out, Dr. Constance Tipper of Cambridge University. She was a leading expert in metallurgy and material mechanics, part of the joint British-American Research Committee on Ship Welding. Tipper wasn't a shipbuilder, but she understood something many engineers didn't. Steel isn't a fixed material. It has an invisible threshold called the ductile to brittle transition temperature. Below this point, steel no longer bends under stress. It fractures like glass. In her lab, she took steel samples from Liberty ships, placed them in a cold chamber, and performed tension tests. At room temperature, the steel bent and flexed, but once cooled below 40 degrees, it shattered with a sharp crack. She called it brittle fracture, and it was this phenomenon that had doomed dozens of ships. American and British engineers began re-examining blueprints. They identified three major flaws in the Liberty ships. First, the hull structure used many right-angled corners in cargo holds, known as stress concentrators, which amplified tension 3 to 4 times. Second, the hulls were fully welded. In old riveted ships, each joint acted as a crack arrestor, a natural barrier against fracture. But welded hulls were like seamless steel ribbons. Once a crack started, it could race down the entire length. Third, the rapid welding process caused heat buildup. When the steel cooled too fast, it created residual stress, internal tension trapped in the hull, just waiting for a slight jolt to unleash disaster. When these three factors combined in the cold waters of the North Atlantic, where temperatures often fell below 40 degrees, disaster struck. Brittle steel, residual stress, and sharp corners formed a deadly triangle. The cause was now clear. But how to fix it while the war was still raging? Engineers had to build and repair simultaneously. They experimented with different steel compositions, added manganese, reduced carbon. They rounded all cargo hold corners and changed welding sequences to include interruptions that stopped crack propagation. But the problem still lingered. Because the real culprit was harder to see, the human factor, still present on the production line. During night shifts in Richmond and Portland, thousands of welders rotated in and out. They worked fast, non-stop. Each finished weld stretched and shrank the steel, warping it. Steel had no time to cool naturally, and every new weld piled on more stress. No one realized that it wasn't the weld quality, but the welding sequence that lay at the root of the problem. Not until late 1943, after dozens of ships cracked under similar conditions, did investigators ask, have we been welding the wrong way? That question marked the turning point, from panic to enlightenment. From the fractures of winter, America began to learn more deeply about its own materials, about mechanics, about limits, and about human humility in the face of nature. The nightmare of 1943 didn't just break ships, it cracked the very pride of American industry. But in that fracture, like a thin beam of light, was the path to improvement. A new generation of engineers was being summoned. And in the blazing weld shops of Richmond, among tens of thousands of workers, one ordinary woman was watching the steel plates warp under her torch. Bessie Hamill, a name history nearly forgot, was about to discover what engineers had long overlooked. The story of fractured ships wouldn't end in disaster. It would lead America to a new revolution, one of understanding, of knowledge, and of steel welded the right way. 1944. As the war entered its most brutal phase, America was forced to look inward. The Liberty ships, once symbols of industrial might, had now become emblems of human limitation. Cracks, mid-sea fractures, lost lives, all raised a pressing question. Had America moved too fast? Henry John Kaiser, the man behind the miracle of speed, knew it was time for change. In a meeting in Richmond, he declared, "We won because we were fast, but now we must win because we endure." A bold decision followed: halt the production line to redesign an entirely new generation of ships. Its name carried a lost belief: Victory Ship. The Victory Ship, designation VC2SAP2, was not merely an upgraded Liberty, it was an apology in steel and a declaration that America could correct its mistakes through intelligence. The Victory's hull was longer, 140 meters. Its bow was streamlined, its deck higher to withstand waves, its main engine more powerful at 8,500 horsepower. Speed increased from Liberty's 11 knots to 17 knots, one-third faster, enough to outpace the lurking U-boats of the Atlantic. But the biggest change wasn't in the engine, it was in the soul of the steel. Metallurgists selected a new kind, killed steel, deoxidized with aluminum and silicon, with low carbon content, plus manganese and nickel to preserve ductility at low temperatures. Unlike Liberty Steel, it no longer lived. No more gas bubbles forming micro-voids that triggered brittle fractures. Engineers redesigned every deck corner, every cargo hold. All sharp right angles were replaced with curves, letting stress flow like water. They called it stress flow design. The hull no longer had sudden breaking points. It became a smooth, unified structure that could breathe with the sea. The welding process was rewritten from scratch. Engineers introduced stress-balanced welding, alternating welds from the center outward, allowing each steel section to cool naturally, avoiding internal energy buildup. After welding, the entire hull was heated to 2100 degrees to release residual stress. A female welder in Richmond, Bessie Hamill, was the first to observe that welding from the center out reduced warping. Her simple insight would later be documented in technical manuals and become an international welding standard. Her words, "Steel needs to breathe too," echoed through shipyards. Kaiser introduced a new slogan across the system: speed, quality, safety, our victory. Speed was still essential, but no longer everything. Quality was the real victory. In the shipyards, the atmosphere changed. Workers no longer raced to set daily records, but to build ships that would never crack again. Tens of thousands were retrained. Each worker had a personal tech card detailing welding procedures, temperatures, and cooling intervals. Massive steel plates, weighing tens of tons, were assembled like Lego, modular components from bow to engine room, fitting precisely to the inch. Initially, progress halved. But within months, the new line ran smoothly, almost as fast as before. And on January 5, 1944, the first Victory ship, SS United Victory, was launched. A bold statement ran along its hull: "Built to last, made for victory." Steel no longer cracked, no more sharp pings in the cold fog. Instead came the roar of hundreds of ships leaving port, slicing through the sea, carrying fuel, food, soldiers, and a belief reforged by sweat and intellect. By the end of 1944, over 200 Victory ships were completed. By 1945, the total reached 531. Not a single one broke in half. Not one brittle fracture reoccurred. From the wreckage of engineering failure, Americans rebuilt faith with scientific precision. Metallurgists called it the Tipper Revolution. Dr. Constance Tipper's discoveries on brittle fracture and ductile to brittle transition were added to technical curricula worldwide. Thanks to her, humanity understood. Steel is not just strong, it's fragile. And only by understanding that fragility can we turn it into true strength. The Liberty to Victory story became the 20th century's first industrial lesson. That speed cannot replace understanding, and true progress lies not in setting records, but in the ability to correct our own mistakes. In the bright glare of welding arcs, amid the whine of cranes against a sunset sky, America of 1944 was no longer the rushed nation of 1942. It had matured, humbled before steel, placing people above the production line, realizing that victory lies not just in numbers, but in the quality of belief. Steel remained steel, but people had changed. And from the fractures of 1943, they had welded not just ships, but America's pride. As 1945 approached, World War II neared its end. Smoke and fire still blanketed Europe and the Pacific, but at shipyards in California, Maine, and Oregon, a different kind of smoke was rising. Smoke from new ships, smoke from a faith reborn. The Victory ship was more than just a vessel. It was proof of what humanity could achieve when it learned from its mistakes. From the failure of the Liberty ships, America had turned fear into creative power. From the cold crack of fractured steel, they forged metal that listened to human will. Over 531 victory ships sailed between 1944 and 1945. Not a single one broke in half. Not a single accident from brittle fracture. Each ship was a testament to engineering, to discipline, to belief. Sailors who once hesitated to step aboard a Liberty now held their heads high. They called the victory ships Iron Angels. June 1944, D-Day. Along the beaches of Normandy, waves of transport ships arrived. Amid flares and fog, hundreds of victory ships delivered ammunition, food, tanks, and fuel for the Allies. Amid the chaos, American captains said only the victory ships were fast and strong enough to make the landing without breaking their backs in the cold surf. As the war wound down, those ships didn't rest. They continued on to Asia, carrying aid, bringing prisoners of war home. They braved storms, ice fields, Pacific waters strewn with wreckage, and survived. Henry John Kaiser, father of both the Liberty and Victory programs, was now celebrated not just for speed, but for vision. He understood that industry wasn't just about machines, but about people. After the war, he didn't shut down the shipyards, but repurposed them for peace, building homes, cars, industrial materials. He founded Kaiser Aluminum and Kaiser Permanente, the foundations of America's post-war aluminum industry and its largest healthcare system. Kaiser once said, "Victory isn't just the name of a ship, it's a philosophy of life. Every time we surpass our limits, we achieve victory. But behind the glory were the nameless ones. The workers, the women, the welders, people like Bessie Hamill, who spotted a flaw in the welding sequence. Her name never made the books. She never got a medal. But her experimental thinking forever changed modern welding. Engineers later called her method the center outward welding sequence. It was codified in the American Welding Society's standards in 1947, forming the basis for all structural steelwork in the 20th century. From the Brooklyn Bridge to offshore oil rigs, from the Alaska pipeline to nuclear reactors, all bore traces of that thinking. In the 1950s, U.S. universities included case study Liberty versus Victory in mechanical engineering curricula. Students learned not only about ductile to brittle transition or residual stress, but something deeper: that engineering pride must be paired with scientific humility. No blueprint, however perfect, means anything if you don't listen to the one holding the welding torch. Constance Tipper continued her materials science research at Cambridge. She became a pioneer in fracture mechanics, a field that would later save thousands of lives by predicting structural failures in bridges, ships, and aircraft. Her findings were applied in NASA space projects and throughout the oil and nuclear industries. A woman scientist in a world of steel and fire, but it was she who made the world realize materials have a soul too. Thus, the legacy of the Victory wasn't just in 531 ships, but in how humans mastered matter. Welding technology kept evolving. Post-weld heat treatment, annealing, magnetic particle inspection, ultrasonic testing, all were born from Liberty's lesson. The world learned. To make steel last, you must understand how it endures. And for engineering to be strong, there must be belief that we can do better. In American shipyards after 1945, that story was passed down to new generations, about the time America built ships like assembling cars, about vessels breaking apart in calm waters, and about the woman who changed everything with one simple observation. That story isn't just history, it's a reminder that true progress doesn't come from records, but from mistakes corrected with belief and intellect. After the war, many Victory ships were sold and converted into civilian freighters, research vessels, and training ships. Some still exist in the 21st century. The SS American Victory, launched in 1945, is now a floating museum in Tampa, Florida, where visitors can place their hands on the steel deck and feel history in the welds still intact. On its hull, the old paint has faded with time, but the words remain readable. Built for victory. Not victory of war, but victory of humanity. Over fear, over limits, over ourselves. And so, from the broken pieces of 1943, America forged a new symbol, not just of steel, but of industrial spirit, resilience, and a belief in the power to fix our own flaws, the kind of victory that made the world look up in awe. After the final gunfire of World War II fell silent, what remained were ruins, scars on the land, and fractures in human memory. But rising from the ashes, one thing never faded: the unyielding spirit. The victory ships continued their journeys in peacetime. They carried cargo, fuel, immigrants, and dreams across oceans. From the ports of San Francisco to Yokohama, from Baltimore to Manila, those steel decks still caught the sun's light, still breathed the air of an era that once believed nothing was impossible. Americans called it the liberty to victory transition, the journey from freedom to triumph. But deeper still, it was a journey from pride to understanding, from blind speed to the precision of intellect. Young engineers of the 1950s, stepping into new shipyards, were taught. No steel is perfect, only people can perfect it. And that lesson shaped the entire modern industrial world. Principles like brittle fracture, residual stress, ductile to brittle transition temperature, and stress-balanced welding are now the bedrock of every engineering discipline: aerospace, energy, construction, oil and gas, nuclear. Every time an engineer draws a weld line on a blueprint, somewhere in the world's technical map still echoes the legacy of liberty and victory. Two symbols, one of failure, one of rebirth. Bessie Hamill passed away in 1987 in a small house in Sacramento. No statues, no medals, just an old certificate, faded, naming her Master Welder of Richmond Yard No. 3. But her legacy outshines all honors. Every time an arc welder sparks in a worker's hand, every time a joint holds without cracking, her spirit is there. And Henry Kaiser, the man once mocked for building ships like cars, left behind an empire not of weapons, but of hospitals, factories, and people. He died in 1967, but his words still echo in America's industrial history. Never ask if it can be done. Ask how it can be done faster, better, stronger. Constance Tipper, the woman with bright eyes behind thick glasses, was honored by the University of Cambridge as one of the most influential scientists of the 20th century. In her final years, she wrote, "We cannot love steel without fearing it, just as we cannot understand strength without witnessing its breaking." Those words serve as a fitting farewell to an age of steel, of human courage, and the desire to transcend limits. The victory ship didn't just save America. It saved the world's belief in industry, in science, and in humanity's ability to right its wrongs. From that lesson, nations learned to control materials, control processes, and control themselves. Today, when we look at massive engineering feats, the Golden Gate Bridge, the Hoover Dam, nuclear aircraft carriers, the International Space Station, we're seeing the crystallization of a lesson paid for in sweat, tears, and fractured steel in the winter of 1943. Because in every great structure, there are two parts, one built from engineering, the other built from faith. From anonymous workers at Richmond Yard to scientists at Cambridge, from Henry Kaiser to Bessie Hamill, they all shared one thing: a refusal to accept limits. They proved that sometimes, to move forward, humanity must first stop, look back, and weld shut the cracks within itself. The war is long over, but that fire, the fire of industrial spirit, of courage, of intellect and belief, has never gone out. Stand before a surviving Victory ship, and you can still see the old welds shining under the sun. Each seam a memory, each joint a story. And when the sea breeze blows through, you might just hear echoes from 70 years ago. The sound of hammers, of welding arcs, and of human hearts beating in rhythm with steel. It is the sound of an era that never died. An era when America learned to turn failure into triumph, cold steel into soul, and cracks into legend. This is the miracle of steel.